Welcome back to MMA Al Dente. I am the guy who picked Joanna Jędrzejczyk to defeat Rose Namajunas, and I'm here to talk about the UFC 304 preliminary card. In the main event of UFC 304's preliminary card, we have Manel Kape taking on Muhammad Mokaev. I've gone back and forth on this fight, but I've settled on Mokaev winning. That is my pick. And I'll go with a decision, but a round 3 submission wouldn't surprise me if he was the win. Having said that, it wouldn't surprise me at all if Manel Kape was the win as well. So while I'll play sprinkles on some props maybe, I'm generally staying away from this one, even at such tight odds. Mokaev's wrestling, in my opinion, should carry him to a victory, but I do think if it starts to slip like it did against Alex Perez, Manel Kape will make him pay in a way that Alex Perez did not. And if he had done so, he would have won a decision. That was still a razor-thin decision, but I scored it for Mokaev because he had more activity, striking and failed takedown attempts as well. But it was still a big test for Mokaev. And that's part of the reason I'm picking him. He's passed a lot of tests. He's only got 11, 12 fights as a pro, depending on who you ask. But half of them have been in the UFC, and they're against good competition as well. And not one of these fights has really been easy, aside from the Cody Durden win, which is still an excellent victory. But he's had answers for everybody down the stretch. His activity against Alex Perez, his comeback against Tim Elliott, out of desperation, he needed that, and he worked for it. Grounded Tim Elliott, and with that heavy pressure, found an arm triangle and forced a stoppage to get the victory. Also against Jafel Filho, he was largely doing well in that fight, but he was put in the deepest knee bar in round 3, and he was able to survive, even though his leg didn't survive. And he pulled himself out and strangled Jafel Filho not long afterwards in the same round. So, in general, I trust all the traits of Muhammad Mokaev. That's not to mention neutralizing guys like Charles Johnson down the stretch. But he's got good cardio, seems like a really tough guy, and he doesn't wilt. Shit can be turning around for him. The fight could be getting away from him, and he doesn't stop. So that's why he's my prediction to win this fight. But again, sitting at minus 140 or whatever, I still can't bet on him because I'm scared. And Manel Kape, I think, would make him pay for some of his mistakes that he showed against Alex Perez and win that fight. But let's get into the losses. Mokaev's got none as a pro or as an amateur. And by the way, he's got like a 30-0 amateur career, if you want to know where he became such a seasoned fighter at 23. And Manel Kape's got 6 losses. He lost once way back when to actually a round 3 submission. And then every other fight that he's lost has been pretty much at the UFC level against killers over in Japan. And since he got to the UFC, he's only lost to Pantoja, the champ, and Mateus Nicolau, who, despite the chin and whatever, he's a very good fighter. And you could certainly argue Manel Kape won that fight, but that's for another discussion. But he's only lost to the very best, and the only other guy to finish him was Kyoji Horiguchi, one of the best fighters in the world. He got him out of there with an arm triangle choke deep into round 3. That was in the semifinals of a tournament, too. But that's it as far as him getting finished. Just twice, and it's been round 3 submission. And, of course, with the round 3 submission victories for Muhammad Mokaev, I'll plug those records into each other, and I'll end up placing a prop bet. But that's the only 2 times he's been finished. Manel Kape has looked very tough in all of his other defeats and very competitive. And he's got an excellent chin. He's been dropped a few times technically, but he wasn't really too hurt. Guy's really tough to get out of there. I don't think a strike is going to rock him in here. And also, he's got a great skill set, Manel Kape. Not only is he one of the most dangerous flyweights on the planet on the feet, because he's exceptionally dangerous, but he's also got really good grappling skills as well. He can make shit work on top, and if you get on top of him, he's not a fish out of water either. You know, ripping the Kimura on fucking David Dvorak. But the submission skills, they're good, but they're not. I don't think they would match Muhammad Mokaev. I'd be very surprised if Manel Kape won by submission here. Even though he's got a few nice subs, beat the guy Daniel Barres, former UFC fighter. But still, the grappling, I think, should belong to Muhammad Mokaev here. Kape's path to victory is getting by the grappling, slowing things down, and beating Mokaev up on the feet and making him pay for failed takedown attempts. But again, Muhammad Mokaev has shown a lot of great traits as well. No chin issues, no cardio issues, nothing going against him that is visible. And on top of that, he's got 2 inches of height, 2 inches of reach. He's a pretty clean striker himself, and I think he should be able to keep himself safe against Manel Kape as he game plans on how to take another takedown, get another takedown. So Mokaev is the prediction. I just think he's going to impose himself, make it a grappling fight, and score enough points to get a victory. If not, suck the life out of Manel Kape, wear him down, and put him away down the stretch. But again, even at such tight odds, I haven't bet on Muhammad Mokaev, probably because I made the mistake of watching his fight against Alex Perez last. But it's given me doubt, and I do think Manel Kape is in that same realm as Alex Perez, an elite fighter and a contender right now. So there's just a lot of doubt. But again, the pick is Muhammad Mokaev by round 3 submission, whatever the fuck I said. Up next, we have the latest installment of I'm picking this guy, but I'm betting on this guy. And this guy will be played by Daniel Pineda. And look, I haven't bet on him. His money line is plus 330. I'm going to wait for the props because when he does win, it's by finish. So I'll just throw a stab on him there. But as of now, my only bet, and I like it, is over 1.5 rounds, which I consider to be a bet on Nathaniel Wood. But still, I think it's a good bet. Even if Daniel Pineda wins, I don't envision it being early, although he's incredibly dangerous. But Nathaniel Wood by decision is the official prediction. I think he's durable enough to stand up to any danger on the feet from Daniel Pineda. Pineda's dangerous, but he's not exactly Mr. One-Punch Knockout, although it's happened in the past. And on the flip side, Nathaniel Wood's only been truly knocked out once, and it was to John Dodson, who, despite being smaller, he's one of the hardest-hitting fighters ever at flyweight and bantamweight and whatever else. And that was it. And that was a round 3 knockout. So I think on the feet, he'll be safe, and I think he'll cleanly outpoint Daniel Pineda. Pineda, even though he's bigger and stronger, I think Nathaniel Wood will beat him to the punch and in general throws a lot cleaner strikes, and he'll be getting the better of him. On the ground, each guy's been submitted a few times, but years and years ago, Nathaniel Wood was tapped twice, and both of those losses were over 10 years ago, I believe. And Daniel Pineda has been tapped 6 times, and every one of them is like over 15 years ago. And the last 2 are actually both knee bars to Chaz Skelly, which is phenomenal. But I don't think either guy should be getting a submission. However, I'll say if somebody does, I think it's Pineda. He's just more deadly as a submission artist. Nathaniel Wood came into the UFC and got 3 consecutive subs, and that was a good look because he's only got 5 altogether. But still, Pineda's, it's been so long since he's been tapped, and he's been tapping people. Maybe not Nathaniel Wood or guys like that, but he's been tapping some good fighters, and I think he's just overall more dangerous. He can rip your arm off with a Kimura, rip your neck off with a guillotine, and he's not bad off his back either. He's got a good triangle, although I don't expect him to win by triangle. But still, I think he's going to have a hard time getting in on Nathaniel Wood, getting in on his hips and making this a grappling fight. And I think he's going to be a little too sloppy there and a little too sloppy on the feet and getting cleanly outpointed by Nathaniel Wood. Even though Pineda's been knocked out recently and he is 38 years old, he was knocked out by Cub Swanson. He's still only been knocked out a few times, actually once by Antonio Carvalho in the UFC a decade ago. That's the guy that Darren Elkins actually retired with a standing knockout, if you could believe it. But still, he's only been knocked out the once in the last few years. And in general, I think he'll be safe with Nathaniel Wood's level of danger. Nathaniel Wood, he's still a guy that I'm trying to figure out at featherweight, but I do think he belongs, despite that recent setback to Muhammadjan Naimov, where he was bullied and size was a factor. But here, I think he's just going to be too clean of a technician to lose this fight. And he's going to be too clean of a technician to make this a grappling fight. So Nathaniel Wood by decision is the pick. The bet right now is over 1.5 rounds. And of course, I'll wait for the props and probably throw a stab on Daniel Pineda by finish. I will throw a stab at him because I think his money line is a little too high to begin with. And you'll get a better line with him via finish. Probably. I mean, if you look at his record, it should be the same as his money line. But of course, it won't be. And when I say finish, I think submission would come before knockout. But I don't think either one of them would come before Nathaniel Wood winning by decision. And that is the pick. Up next, Molly McCann versus Bruna Brazil. My prediction for the fight is Molly McCann wins. I'll go with a TKO. Fuck it. But of course, decision wouldn't surprise me. And on the flip side, I'll say I'm tempted to bet on Bruna Brazil because she's a 3-1 underdog here. But I haven't pulled the trigger. In general, I'm just staying away from this. But I will look at the props to see what Molly McCann's long shot TKO odds are, and also to see what Bruna Brazil's decision line is, because I'm pretty sure if she wins against Molly, it's by decision. But I think for her to win by decision, she's either got to take Molly down, which she can do, and she can control Molly perhaps, but she's not in the same league as the girls who have done that to Molly. And on the feet, she's the better striker on the outside against Molly McCann. If Bruna Brazil can keep it at kicking range, she's got some excellent attacks, pretty damn good footwork as well, and she's the longer, taller fighter. She would do well there. And I think she will do well there at first, but I do think Molly McCann's going to get in her face. She's going to crowd her. She's going to make this about physicality, whether it's standing up with her more dangerous power or whether it's on the ground, where Molly, she's not exactly known as a ground fighter, but she's got skills down there. Just got her first submission, actually, against Diana Belbita. But she can maul you as well. She came very close to TKOing Diana Belbita in their first fight. Really close. And I say I'm harping on the TKO because Bruna Brazil has 4 losses, and 3 of them are by TKO. One of them was an injury where she got tripped against the cage, and on the takedown, she tweaked her knee. So that doesn't really count. But the other 2, even though they're the good UFC fighters, she was TKO'd. I haven't seen the first one. It's to Ariane Canalosi, and it is in her MMA debut. So there's a little bit of forgiveness there right off the bat. But still, the result is TKO. Whether it was standing up or on the ground, you know me. I've tried to see it. Can't fucking find it. But I was able to see her loss against Denise Gomes, of course. Denise Gomes really beat her up, hurt her with a bunch of right hands, and Bruna Brazil was not adapting at all. She was sitting there teed up for those right hands, and the 5th, 6th one, whatever caught her, put her out. So wasn't a great look for her striking defense. And here against Molly McCann, I think it's going to be a similar type of fight. Molly is more powerful, kind of like Denise Gomes, and she's shorter and the rest of it. But Molly is really aggressive, and she's really durable, incredibly tough to stop in her tracks. I think she was half dropped, but she wasn't even dropped. It might count as a drop against Ji-Yeon Kim or whatever, but it was like a headbutt or something. But she's really tough to stop in her tracks, and I think it won't take long before she's crowding Bruna Brazil. And of course, if Bruna's throwing leg kicks out there without setting them up, Molly will catch those kicks. What better way to make the fight about physicality than to catch a kick? So I envision Molly McCann crowding Bruna Brazil, making this a fight in tight, and getting the better of her with her strength, physicality, and power, frankly. Molly's been submitted 3 times, I should mention, but they're to Jillian Robertson, Yulia Stolyarenko, who's like Ronda Rousey, and Erin Blanchfield, who's still a top 5 fighter or whatever she is. But that's it. Her other losses have taken place on the ground as well, but they are decisions, and they're still to a higher class of fighter, in my opinion, than Bruna Brazil as of now. Bruna still has time to prove herself. But I don't think Bruna's got the wrestling to go through Molly McCann on the ground in that way. I think it's still her best course of action. I mean, well, her best course of action would be to keep the fight standing and at range. And if she can do that, yeah, then that's the fight she wants to fight every time. I think she's going to have a hard time doing that with Molly, again, stopping her in her tracks. And her best course in this fight might be to try to take Molly McCann to the ground. It's not like Bruna Brazil is going to work her over like a Jillian Robertson, but she's a big enough girl and she's got enough skills where if she can secure top position, take the back or whatever, it's obviously valuable points that cannot be denied because the crowd's not going to be cheering and swaying any judges when you're being controlled on the ground. And of course, I should mention, Molly McCann's going to have the crowd on her side. In the event of a close fight, it's probably going to go the way of Molly McCann because the crowd's going to make it seem that way. But despite the decision being a distinct possibility, I'm actually going with a TKO win for Molly McCann. I think she can rough up Bruna Brazil on the inside, and on the ground, if she's on top, she's going to maul her as well. Molly McCann, she's only got 2 finishes inside the octagon, and they're both spinning back elbows. That one over Luana Carolina was beautiful. I never get tired of it. And I think that's the type of fight I envision, like against Luana Carolina. She almost had her TKO'd in round 1. She swarmed her, clipped her early, took away that range, and beat her up to the point where I actually thought she spent a little too much energy and, her chances of winning went down. But in the end, she got the most phenomenal finish in female MMA history, maybe, in round 3. But on the ground as well, she's a problem. She almost TKO'd Deanna Belbita, mauled her in round 2 in their first fight, and of course she got her out of there by submission in their second fight, Molly McCann's only submission. I suppose that's a possibility here against Bruna Brazil, but just plugging in their records, I would think the TKO would come first, and that is the pick. But yeah, the pick is Molly McCann, and I'm confident in her, but not enough to bet on her at the money line, minus 350. That's just a little too wide, in my opinion. So I'm going to sit back and wait for the props. If something jumps out, I'll play it. But again, I'm picking TKO, but I'm not married to that. Of course, a decision is a possibility. So I'm having a hard time choosing what I would even bet on. I guess the odds would have to decide for me. Up next, we have Caolan Loughran taking on Jake Hadley. Jake is stepping up on pretty short notice here, replacing Roman Tavares. And the fact that he's stepping up on short notice is what's stopping me from betting on him or even picking him. But I do think this could be a close fight. I think Jake has a definite speed and agility advantage on the feet. Not to mention, I also think he's the better technical striker and grappler. But Caolan Loughran is still well-versed. He's the more powerful guy on the feet and the stronger guy on the ground, and his grappling isn't bad at all. He's a more methodical grappler. He's gotten quite a few finishes from takedowns and advancing to full or back mount. That's how he gets most of his finishes. But here, I don't know if he's going to get that finish over Jake Hadley. Jake's never been put away. This is him on short notice and moving up in weight, so of course I could be wrong about that. But I like the traits I've seen from Jake Hadley. He was hurt, dropped by Charles Johnson. He was put in some tight chokes by Cody Durden, had him in a deep anaconda or Darce choke. I think it was an anaconda. And he's always looked tough, Jake Hadley. And I think here the only way he gets finished is if it's settled on the physical level, where Caolan is on top of him, advances into fuller back mount, and Jake just can't do anything about the position because he's overwhelmed physically. But I still don't envision that happening. I think if Caolan Loughran wins, and he is my pick to win, I guess, I've got him winning by decision. I think it'll be one where Jake is doing well early but slows down, and Caolan is able to catch him and suck him into a physicality battle. So that's the basis for the pick. Caolan Loughran has only one loss, and it's the Taylor Lapulus, and that's a fight that he took on very short notice. He had a full camp, but he was supposed to fight somebody else the day of, and shit got turned around, and he ended up stepping in against Taylor, who I thought was a potentially bad matchup for him, and it turns out he was. Even though Caolan still had success in there, was able to take down Taylor, and had a strong round two, he was still a step and a half behind on the feet, and that's where the majority of the fight was contested, and he lost the decision. And I do think that's how he'll lose the majority of his fights that he loses. I think it'll be a guy that he's not able to take down, who's faster than him on the feet and comfortable moving backwards. And I think those are advantages Jake Hadley has, but Jake is not as strong as Taylor Lapulus. And I think once they're in tight, he won't be able to defend takedowns as well as Taylor did. Caolan Loughran, he's got a lot of round two finishes coming into the UFC. He had 4 consecutive round 4 finishes in Cage Warriors, 3 of which come from the full mount to the back mount, and one of them is a knockout, standing knockout. But he's a seek and destroy fighter. He wants to get on top of you, advance, and pound the shit out of you or strangle you. And I think it's good that he's got a strong round 2. That's a great trait to have as a fighter. It's better than having strong round 1s. And he actually had his best round in round 2 against Taylor and even against Angel Pacheco in his dominant decision victory in his last fight. So I think that's a good look for Caolan Loughran. Not that, everything's going to hang on round 2, but it means he doesn't have bad cardio. And I think that's a good asset for him. Plus, he doesn't really push the pace too much to, put his cardio in a position where it will fail him. He's more of a slower, plodding guy because he's a power-based striker. Everything is going to be a strong left hook, and he's more dangerous for that, but still more susceptible to being beaten to the punch, in my opinion. Jake Hadley, he's got 3 losses. All 3 are by decision, all in the UFC. And all were to guys who actually, Charles Johnson beat him on the feet, but the other 2 were fights in which he was out-wrestled. Alan Nascimento beat him by decision, and Cody Durden beat him by decision as well. And that Cody Durden fight was back and forth. Again, Jake was in a really tight anaconda choke and came out of that and put him in a very deep armbar. But in general, he was outpointed by the better wrestler in Cody Durden. And against Alan Nascimento, that was a fun grappling match. But in general, top position was the story of the fight. And that's how he lost. And to Charles Johnson, that's a fight I don't envision him losing to Caolan Loughran. Charles Johnson, the exact opposite type of fighter. And he was able to take what Jake was given early on, where Jake looked really, really sharp. And then he cracked Jake, dropped him in round 2, and was in general getting the better of him in rounds 2 and 3. But in the end, it was still a close fight. Just didn't go Jake's way. I thought he lost the fight. But that's it for the guys that have beaten him. And again, he's never been knocked out despite the knockdown. He's never been submitted despite the tight chokes. He's got a better overall striking game, I'd say, and grappling game than Caolan Loughran. And I trust him better from his back. Framed that nice triangle armbar over Carlos Candelario instantly after being taken down. But I don't envision anything from the guard working against Caolan. I think Caolan, with his strength and his top pressure, will advance. He'll be the one doing the advancing. And on the feet, even though I think Jake has assets and he's the better fundamental striker and he's got movement and all the rest of it, I don't see him being able to stop Caolan Loughran in his tracks And I do think Jake will slow down over the course of the fight. And I just envision Caolan keeping coming and, again, sucking him into his type of fight where his strength and physicality matters more. So Caolan by decision is the pick. I don't know if I'll play that, his money line, or I probably will play rounds 2 and 3 finish for Caolan Loughran, especially with the short notice for Jake Hadley. But that's not the pick. I think Jake's got enough skills where even on short notice he'll be able to survive. And Caolan by decision is the pick. I'll wait for the money line itself as well as the props to see if there's anything worth betting on. Up next, we have Mick Parkin versus Lucas Brzeski. My prediction for the fight is Mick Parkin wins a decision. And I think ultimately the difference will be grappling, him scoring some points with some valuable takedowns and being the more physical, stronger fighter on the inside. But I see Lucas Brzeski being very competitive on the feet. And if he's able to keep this fight standing for the majority of the fight, it's going to be close. I think Brzeski can put up better numbers, perhaps, than Mick Parkin and win the points battle. But still, in a fight that I envision being pretty close, I think the guy that's fighting in front of his hometown should have the slight advantage for sure. So overall, I just favor Mick Parkin to win. But he is one of those slower heavyweight zombies who finds himself in a lot of close fights on the lower end of the UFC heavyweight division. And I would not be surprised at all if Brzeski was able to pull this one off. But I'm going with Mick Parkin. I think he will mix in some grappling, and that will be the difference. And on the feet, I'm not saying he's at a disadvantage, but I think it's obviously a more winnable fight for Brzeski. I have bet on the over 2.5 rounds at minus 190 or minus 188 or whatever the fuck. I don't love that because these guys are heavyweights. There's 500 pounds of manpower in there swinging at each other. And of course, Brzeski has been knocked out twice. Mick Parkin's never been finished. And Brzeski, he has been finished just twice, but he was knocked out in his most recent loss to Waldo Cortez Acosta as well. And he was dropped against Carl Williams with a barrage early in round 2. So there's a little bit of doubt with him and his durability, but I don't think Mick Parkin has what it takes to go through a chin like that. You know, I'm sure he can knock me unconscious, but I'd be surprised if he knocked out Brzeski. So yeah, the only bet as of now is the over, and I think it covers both guys' primary path to victory. I'd be really surprised if Brzeski was able to finish Parkin in any way. I think his only real path to victory is decision. And because I think that, I would be interested in his props once they drop. But again, the pick is Mick Parkin. I think he's going to crowd Lucas Brzeski, be stronger on the inside, be the more willing takedown artist. And on top, not that he's a total beast, but, I don't think he's going to be ripping him to the mat relentlessly like Carl Williams. But I still think that control could ultimately be the difference. Kind of like it was in the fight against Kyle Machado. I thought Machado won that fight, to be honest. But the reason Mick Parkin did must have been the grappling, which was ultimately the difference, I guess, if you ask the judges. Still a close fight, though. But that's as close as he's come to a defeat as a pro. Mick's undefeated, and he's got no glaring weaknesses. His chin's been there for him, his cardio, and the rest of it. And I think, again, with the hometown crowd in a close fight, if Mick isn't able to take him down, I envision it being close on the feet. And with the hometown, Mick Parkin should probably win that decision anyway. Brzeski, he's got a few losses, 2 by knockout. He was knocked out by Waldo and this other guy early in his career, both knockouts. And the other losses are by decision, where he was out-wrestled and crowded by Carl Williams and then beaten by Martin Buday in a fight that I thought Brzeski won. And that'd be a great win on his resume. And that's part of the reason why I think he's got a shot against Mick Parkin. Mick Parkin, he's undefeated and he's shown a lot of great traits, but he's had a lot of close fights so far, and all on the bottom end of the UFC's heavyweight division. And that is where Lucas Brzeski is, to be fair, but it means this one could be close. Mick's not the most dominant force out there. Still, he's got enough traits going his way, and I think he's the more willing and better overall grappler and the stronger guy on the inside. So I'm taking Mick Parkin to grind out a decision victory. As of now, the only bet is on the over, and my heart isn't totally into that, and I'll wait for the props so I can throw some money down the drain on Lucas Brzeski by decision. Because that's how we do things here at MMA Al Dente. It's all fucking stupidity. In the next fight, we have Bukauskas versus Marcin Prachnio. My prediction for the fight is Marcin Prachnio wins, and I've got him winning by decision. But despite that, each guy's been knocked out a handful of times, and most of their wins come via TKO. So plugging in their records together, I think there's value on plus 160 at under 2.5 rounds. Again, the pick is decision, so my heart's not totally into it. But I see the value there, so I figured I'd ruin 2 parlays with it. But I have bet on the Marcin Prachnio money line as well, because, again, the pick is that he wins a decision. The way these guys have been fighting lately, a decision seems most likely, but I can't ignore all the TKO losses and the TKO wins, frankly. Prachnio had 3 TKO losses early in his UFC career. Plus, he was TKO'd by Alexander Rakic, who's fucking amazing. But still, that was before he got to the UFC. Just too many knockout losses to ignore. And Bukauskas, he was knocked dead against Vitor Petrino in his last fight, a brutal knockout loss. Plus, he was knocked out by Jimmy Crute and this guy, Johnny Redmond, coming in with his hands down. And also, he was TKO'd by Khalil Roundtree, which that was one of those insane kicks straight out of Bloodsport. I don't think that's a path to victory for Prachnio or really anybody else, but it's fucking brutal nonetheless. And in the points battle on the feet, Bukauskas is a really good outside striker. He's got 4 inches of reach to complement him here as well. I think the height is the same. But I still envision Prachnio leading the dance. Bukauskas will be better on the outside, but Prachnio will be on the inside. He'll be the one with the forward pressure. And without any big moments, I think Prachnio puts up the better numbers and wins the points battle. And that's the fight I envision. Also, on the ground, while neither guy's a world beater, I think Prachnio is also the more willing grappler. I think he'd be the one to mix it up and score whatever points there are to be scored in that sense. So I do think, if my prediction is right, it'll be a close fight and it will go the distance. But I give Prachnio an edge there, and that's the basis for my pick. But I can't ignore all the durability issues. These guys have been knocked out a bunch, even if it's been a while since Prachnio's been knocked out. It's not something I can ignore. I'll always look for the props when he fights. And I see the value on the under. It's in conflict with my pick and my other bet, but it is still a value bet. Plus 160 under 2.5 rounds. If something should go wrong, I think it will end up with a finish victory for whoever the fuck things go right for. And in that sense, too, let me say I favor Prachnio. I favor Prachnio to knock out Bukauskas before Bukauskas knocks out Prachnio. And that's all part of the reasoning for me picking Prachnio. So Prachnio by decision is the pick, and the bets, as always, are going every which fucking way. In the next fight, we have Elliott versus Preston Parsons. My prediction for this fight is Preston Parsons wins. And I have a hard time picking a method of victory in this fight. I guess I'll go with a decision. But even if it's a decision or a submission, which is typically how Preston Parsons wins, or a TKO, which is typically how his opponent loses, I still think Preston's victory will be due to grappling in one way or another. And I should mention that Elliott's 2 losses that are TKOs, they are both ground and pound TKOs. He lost on the ground. And he lost to good fighters as well. Mikhail Figlak, who's a current I think current UFC fighter, and this guy Madars Fleminas, who's a very good fighter in Europe. And they were both able to overwhelm him physically, get on top of him, and down the stretch, or at least halfway through the fight, pound him out. But since then, he's been on a great streak, Oban Elliott. He got to showcase his skills at his UFC debut against Val Woodburn. Maybe not the best fighter out there, but still he showcased his skills. And in the fight before that on the Contender Series, he showcased his skills, but also a ton of different traits against Kaique Brito. He was nearly finished, nearly choked, had a really bad round 2, but it was only a 10-8 round on one judge's scorecard. And ultimately, that was the difference, because Oban Elliott regrouped, took over in round 3, and won a majority decision because he was able to contain that round 2 to just 10-8. But again, he showed a lot of great traits there. It's just here in this matchup, it's the exact opposite type of fight. Preston Parsons is bringing a whole different threat with a whole different type of pressure. He's a grappler. Not a pure grappler like his record would suggest. Preston's got decent striking, especially early on before he fatigues a little bit. But you know what? In this one fight against Trevin Giles, the one decision loss he had, he did fade a little bit, but he didn't fade too much, or maybe he got his second wind. But I thought he was going to fall off a cliff, and instead he kind of maintained that slightly sloppier level of technique and kept that into round 3. So he didn't collapse totally. But that was a grueling fight. In the end, it really could have gone either way. It was really close, but it went Trevin Giles' way. Regardless, though, that was really impressive for Preston Parsons. He had never lost by decision before, just been finished. So that was a good look for him in a lot of ways. But speaking of his other losses, he was finished twice by knockout. Daniel Rodriguez knocked him out in his UFC debut, which I'm very sure he took on very short notice. But still, he was knocked out with a nice combination. And against Mike Perry, he was knocked out with a knee back before they were in the UFC. Perry caught him off the break with a big knee. I think it kind of like broke his face or whatever. And he was forced to shell up and got TKO'd. And he does have a submission loss against Valdir Araujo. That was a second round guillotine choke. It was a competitive fight. I thought Preston was a little behind, having trouble getting going on the feet. But he was able to get some success on the ground and then ultimately just got caught in a guillotine and had to tap out. Could have been a little fatigue going on there, but the guy Valdir Araujo was a good fighter, more seasoned fighter as well, and just a tough matchup at that moment. But Preston, in his victories in the UFCs, looked good. Beat Evan Elder in a win that's probably going to get better with age, even though Evan's a smaller guy and the rest of it. Evan's a good fighter. And he also beat Matthew Semmelsberger, who may be rugged and raw and definitely not the slickest technician out there anywhere. But Preston really impressed me there, taking it to him. I had that fight as a toss-up, and in the end, it wasn't much of a toss-up. So here, I think it's going to come down to the grappling of Preston Parsons, and I think he's going to be able to impose himself on Oban Elliott and rip him to the mat. And with the rest of their traits and how they plug in, I think Preston should win this fight. Oban Elliott doesn't have the danger of Mike Perry and Daniel Rodriguez. I don't think he's got that stopping power to knock Preston Parsons out. And on the ground, I don't know what to say about a submission game, but I don't think it's going to be a factor with Preston Parsons all over him. I think Preston wins that wrestling battle, and he's going to be the one advancing from the top position. As for putting away Oban Elliott, hey, he's only lost twice, and it's been by TKO, so that's certainly a possibility. But I think it would be more of a positional thing from Preston, more of a technical win as opposed to just overwhelming him physically. But I do think he's got plenty of options for a finish once he is able to win the wrestling battle. He's got a beast of a submission game, Preston. excellent subs, and I think he will threaten Elliott. But Oban's never been submitted. Certainly could happen here, but I'm going with decision. Preston Parsons by decision is the pick. Preston Parsons money line. I'm happy having bet on that at minus 140. Again, covers every path to victory, and I'm having a hard time deciding what a win for him will look like in this fight. So Preston is the bet, and the official prediction is decision. Next up, we have Kiefer Crosbie taking on Sam Patterson. My prediction for the fight is Sam Patterson wins by round one submission. And I'm not betting on his money line because he's almost a 4-1 favorite. But I did put a small bet on the under. It's set at 1.5 rounds, which I typically don't love. And it's 2-1 odds. But I still think it covers both guys' primary path to victory. I mean, on paper, there's only one way to beat Sam Patterson, and it's a clean knockout in a minute. And I don't think that's going to happen here. But again, if you plug in their records, that's how a loss should look for him. And for the losses on Kiefer Crosbie's end, it's a little more of a mixed bag. He's lost every which way, especially if you go back to his amateur career. But most of the time it's by submission, and all the time it's relatively early. Even if some of those amateur losses are in round two, that's still in the first half of the fight. So, and by that I mean the first half of a pro fight. It's under 7.5 minutes. And that's how I see the fight going. I think Sam Patterson's going to be too much. I think, first of all, his chin should be in better shape, having moved up to welterweight. I think he and his team, if that was their rationale, then it was a great fucking move because he's one of those taller, skinnier guys, and cutting down to 155 couldn't have been great for him. So here I expect him to be a little healthier, first and foremost, which will help him get to the victory. And secondly, I think he's just going to be a little too much for Kiefer Crosbie. Kiefer does have that Terminator style, and he probably hits harder, and I bet he hits hard enough to knock out Sam Patterson. And, of course, he's the more established welterweight. But Sam's the better fighter, and he's definitely the more dangerous guy as well. And even though I can't say he's got the better chin, in fact, I think he's got the worst chin, but I do think he's the much better, much tougher guy to submit and the much better submission artist. Sam's got 6 subs as a pro, 4 of which come by guillotine choke, and he's gotten guillotines in every round. And he's also got 2 rear naked chokes in his last 2 victories, which are over good opposition. Steamrolled Johan Lines in his UFC, his welterweight debut, and looked incredible there. And here against Kiefer Crosbie, I think he's going to be too big and too good of a grappler, and he's going to be all over Kiefer and make it happen somewhat early. Kiefer's been defeated a bunch. As a pro, only 2 of the losses are truly legitimate, and they're submission losses. He lost to Georgi Karahanian, who's a very, very good Bellator fighter and has been for the past decade or so. And also he got submitted as well in his last loss to Kevin Jousset in both of their UFC debuts. Jousset is not done proving himself, but I think he's going to prove to be a very good fighter. Crosbie also did lose by TKO. It was a doctor stoppage, so it's not an official TKO, but I think he was halfway to losing via regular TKO in that fight anyway, against this guy Charlie Leary over in Bellator. Crosbie had his moments early, was really taking it to him where I thought he'd get the finish, but then the fight turned, and again, I was pretty sure he was going to lose via finish. And I guess he did with a doctor stoppage, but whatever. But yeah, he's been finished enough, and as an amateur, plenty of submission losses and a few TKO losses as well that I wasn't able to see. Really wish I could have seen them. But overall, it speaks to some fragility there for Kiefer Crosbie. And I think with a guy who's as potently dangerous as Sam Patterson, he's going to find the finish and find it early. Maybe it'll look like the Kevin Jousset fight, but I think it will be a round 1 submission. So Sam Patterson is the pick. I put the smallest of bets on the under, but I don't love the lines there. I'm going to wait for the props and play Patterson winning by submission early and Kiefer Crosbie winning by knockout early. And I can't commit to that. Depends on what the odds look like, but I'm very sure that's the path to victory for each guy. So at the very least, it's worth looking at. And in the final fight of this video, and the first fight of the night, we have Alice Ardelean taking on Shauna Bannon. Alice is a girl who's making her UFC debut, and I believe she stepped up on relatively short notice here. She's like an Instagram whore or something. I don't know. She cracks eggs between her ass cheeks, makes a mean omelet, whatever. But as a fighter, I think she's still got a lot to prove. She has a pretty deep record, but she stopped fighting for 4 years, like 6 or 7 years ago, and she suffered all of her losses before then. And since making a return, she hasn't beaten anybody of note, although she still looked good. And here in this fight, I've got to side with Shauna Bannon, but it's not something I could hang my hat on. I'm just going to kind of sit back and watch this one. I think my basis for the pick is I think Shawn is the better striker, certainly better at range. I think she likes to joust with those oblique kicks and those kicks she throws. And I think that's a good weapon for her against bigger girls, but certainly against a smaller girl like Alice Ardelean. And when I say smaller, I mean shorter, because you factor in her ass and she's a fucking heavyweight. But I still think Shauna is the overall cleaner striker as well, in addition to having better movement and height and reach and the rest of it. She's just a cleaner striker. Alice Ardelean, for her to win this fight, she's got to crowd Shauna. She's, I'm sure, stronger on the inside, and probably she wants to get on top. She's able to get on top of Shauna Bannon, which even though Shauna I consider to be the better overall fighter, that's still a possibility, her ripping Shauna to the mat. And if she can do that, she can win this fight. She typically destroys her opponents. Only ever won one fight by decision, I think. But I think here against a real good fighter, an actual UFC fighter anyway, if she was to win this fight, it'd be by decision. But the pick is Shauna Bannon wins by decision. Alice Ardelean, every one of her losses comes about 10 years ago. She was only ever finished twice by submission, and to good fighters as well. Deanna Belbita and Weili Zhang, who was just way too much for her, physically dominated her. But that's it. Her other three losses are by decision. And the fights I've seen, she's shown some good traits. That girl, Christina Stanciu, former UFC fighter, for a cup of coffee anyway, she beat Alice by decision. And she definitely won the fight, but Alice looked really tough in there and tried to engage in a Don Fry Takayama type of brawl. And she showed the willingness to do that. She also did that in another fight, one of her victories against some other girl. I couldn't find it after just trying to look for it again. But my point is, she's comfortable throwing down. And I think Shauna Bannon better stay on the outside of her. Really joust her with those kicks. Keep her at bay and not let her get inside. Because inside, with that big ass pressing you against the cage and whatever, driving into you, she's got physicality on her side. And I think that's the first step towards a victory against Shauna Bannon. But I'm going with Shauna. Shauna's a well-versed fighter as well. I mean, I don't want to make her sound like she's some jiu-jitsu expert, but she's confident on the ground, competent on the ground. I don't think Alice would go through her on the ground like she has the fucking scrubs she's fought and beaten. And I think Shauna Bannon, while not letting her get destroyed on the ground if she should find herself there, will be able to bring this fight back to the feet. And on the feet, again, she's the cleaner striker. She may not have as much of a willingness to brawl and may not want to be so much in your face with the pressure and whatever, but she's a tough girl to reach. This is not Bruna Brazil, who had height and reach on Shauna Bannon. Here, Shauna Bannon is the bigger girl, and she's got the style to make the most of those advantages. Again, she uses that kick, the oblique kick, as a jab. She doesn't really jab. with the punches, but sets him up with the kicks and sets up kicks combinations with her kicks as well. So I got her winning that fight. It may be close early on, but I think in the end she'll be able to pull away and win the fight on the feet with a kickboxing battle. My heart's not into it though, and I'm not going to bet on it, but I'm rooting for Shauna Bannon. And that's it for this video. Like, share, subscribe, all that horse shit, and check out my other videos.